Okay, good morning. Welcome back. Hope you had a lovely Easter. Back to our virtual teaching of attachment in psychology. So we are pretty much halfway through attachment now. You've looked at different stages of attachment. Do they develop in set ways? You've looked at a couple of explanations, whether that be learning theory, whether that be Bowlby's theory. And today what we're going to have a look at is there's something called the strange situation. So it's put forward by this researcher called Ainsworth, and it's assessing attachment type in individuals. So you might have heard it already that, people are securely attached, insecurely attached, and what impact does that have on a variety of different things, their sense of self, their relationships, their friendships. How could that impact them later on? So how does this early attachment type that they are given as a child impact them later on in life? So the first thing you can do is a quick 6 marker, evaluate Bowlby's monotropic theory of attachment. What does monotropy mean? Who was Bowlby? Why was it a good theory? Why was it a negative? So you can do that. And then we'll move on to looking at the strange situations. That is what it's called. That is the procedure. Mary Ainsworth is our psychologist in this section. So here she is, Mary Ainsworth. And this is my gran. Oh, how cute is my gran? Like, honestly, she is so cute. My hero, 100%. But they are so similar. I mean, if it's not my granddad looking like... looking like Harold the meme guy and kind of a little bit like Skinner. We've got my gran, her husband is Skinner and she is Mary Ainsworth. I mean, I come from a psychological family, what can I say? So there she is, Mary Ainsworth, and there's my deceased nan now, unfortunately, Barbara Larbury. What an absolute legend. So by the end of this section, the main premise of this are procedure and findings. So a kind of question that you could be asked on Ainsworth's strange situation obviously could be describe and evaluate, but it's a bit of research. So the main ideas, the main sort of evaluation is going to have to be of the procedure, the methodology, and the findings here. So we need to know 3 types of attachment type. They could give you a scenario and ask you to depict what type of attachment type what attachment type is depicted here, and obviously to apply it to some scenarios. They could give you a scenario of a child and ask you, why does this child convey secure attachment or something like that. So obviously not with a partner, but just some things to think about. So her method is devised as a way of measuring the quality of an infant's attachment. So how good is that attachment to caregivers? There's a variety of stages that has to happen to increase the stress of an infant. Okay, and we'll look at those in a video in a second, but you've got a variety of stages that are trying to make that child stressed to see how they respond in certain situations. So if we had to instantly think of some evaluation here, we've got a couple that we could think of. So ethical implications of this research. Is it ethical to put a child under stress, even though we've got the consent of the parents to take part in this experiment, because the parent takes part as well? Is that not an ethical issue? Should we be putting children under stress? Okay, so that's one of the things we need to think about. And then how is she actually going to do this? How is she actually going to measure attachment? What research method do you think is going to be used here? Okay, how are we going to view a child's attachment to their parents? Kind of giving it away there. So the strange situation. It's a technique used all around the world, as we'll see in next lesson. And it places the infant in a variety of situations to look at the quality of the bond, of the attachment with their primary caregiver. Now, thinking back from Bowlby, so Ainsworth was actually a research assistant of Bowlby's. They worked together really closely. What's the word? I can't remember, but I think he was her thesis tutor, I think. And then she obviously developed her own ideas from Bowlby's research. So we can assume here, or we know, that it's going to be the mums. We're looking at mums and their children and the quality of attachment. So it's a controlled, SS, strange situation, is a controlled observation. Okay, so think about all of the strengths and weaknesses that we know about a controlled observation. So we're obviously having to look at the mum and the child do a variety of different activities. So they're going to have behavioural categories that they're ticking off to look at. 2 or 3 researchers observing, watching the mum and the child. What we're going to bring up as some AO3 there. So the procedure is 7 episodes, lasting about 3 minutes each, and it provided Ainsworth with a way of looking at 3 things. Okay, so she was looking at the quality of infant attachment based on stranger anxiety. So what happens when somebody completely novel, completely new, enters the room and tries to engage or play Lego or whatever with the child? How is that going to affect them? So stranger anxiety, separation, take mum out of the equation, she leaves the room for a couple of minutes. How does the child react? I know when I was left alone, my first day of preschool, mum left the room. Oh my Christ, I howled the door down. I was banging on it. I was probably a very insecurely attached child, actually. You'll find out in a minute what that means. And then infant's behaviour towards the mother. So when the mother comes back into the room, how does the child greet her? Is it very positive and they want to be cuddled and they want to be nurtured? Or is it actually quite resentful? How dare you leave the room? I'm not going to engage in any kind of play or conversation or interactional synchrony with you. Okay, so looking at those 3 things in those 7 episodes. So there is the video there. Go ahead and watch it. So it's the strange situation in action. And then you have a sheet. Write down in the boxes what happens in the strange situation and what it tests, and then see if you can think of some issues. Again, obviously I have the answers here, but it makes sense for you to do it. Why not? We've got all of this time. Don't cheat yourself, test yourself. So have a look at the video, answer those questions on the sheet, then come back and assess it. So pause this at whatever time. You can purple pen if you want, why not? So the 7 episodes here, what happens in them and what it's testing. So again, looking at those 3 things as to what they're testing. The caregiver takes the infant into the laboratory room and the infant's left to explore. Okay, so they're in there, they're just looking around, what's happening, what's in this room. It's looking at exploration, it's looking at this idea of a secure base. A stranger then enters, approaches the infant, so wanting to see how they act with strangers. Caregiver leaves, see you later, bye. And then the stranger tries to interact, or tries to take the place of the parent. Looking at separation anxiety and stranger anxiety there. Caregiver returns, stranger goes. So we're looking at reunion behaviour and whether or not they view the parent as a secure base, something that they can trust. Then we've got the caregiver leaves, the infant's totally alone, so again, separation anxiety. Stranger enters again and tries to interact with the infant, stranger anxiety. And then the caregiver returns and greets, so we're looking at reunion behaviour. And Ainsworth was really key on these 3 things and saying that if they exhibit certain types of behaviour, it shows a certain type of attachment, okay? And from that bit of research, so from the strange situation, these are the 3 attachment types that she deduced are common. So sometimes they're called type B, type A, type C. It's important that you know those 3 types because they could refer to them as that, or they could refer to it as secure, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant. Okay, so my way of remembering it, type A avoidant, type B, I Actually, I don't really have a way of remembering type B. So secure is the most common, so we could say, I'm not sure. But if you know type A is avoidant, type C, insecure, resistant, resistor, potentially. Type B in the middle, try to remember that. Secure in the middle. And this was all of her infants that she had in the study. This was a percentage of them that fit into each of these categories, okay? We've seen categories before in stages of attachment. So we can start to think what might be some limitations of putting a child into one of these boxes. Definitely secure, definitely avoidant. Interesting. But secure came out as most common. So they saw the parent as a safe base, they were happy to interact with strangers, and they were happy on reunion behaviour. 22 avoidant and 12 resistant. So if we had to depict some characteristics of these attachment types, again, could be a question they ask you. What is characterised as a securely attached child? What does that look like? So they explore, basically. They're curious, they're happy to explore, but they make sure that they check in with their caregiver. You can test this in dogs as well. So if you let your dog off the lead and you hide behind a tree, I'm very cruel, I do this to my dog, they always go and explore, but then she turns around and she looks for me. And then she's, coming back to me as that safe base. Quite cruel. Make sure that you check that your dog is good off the lead. Moderate separation distress. So when parent leaves the room and when there's a stranger, there's a little bit of upset, a little bit of resistance, but not to the point where it's noticeable. And then when parent returns, they accept their comfort. So mum picks them up, gives them a cuddle. They are happy to accept that. There's no reluctance there. So that's your secure. Your avoidants are very common in Germany, as we'll look at when we look at cultural variations here. They explore freely, but they don't need to return to the caregiver. Okay, so they don't regularly check in. They're quite independent. When the caregiver leaves or returns, there's not really much reaction. Haven't really noticed they've left. Couldn't really care. Not really much stranger anxiety. And then when they come back and, mum or dad tries to comfort them and support them, they don't really need it. They're very independent babies. They're kind of like, don't really care. Okay, so you can call it avoidant because they're not engaging necessarily as much as a securely attached. But it does come down to a variety of different factors like temperament, which we'll look at in evaluation in a minute. Then our insecure resistant are kind of the opposite of this. So instead of being really independent, they don't really explore. They're very clingy, massive distress. So I think this is probably me, to be fair. Massive distress when they're left on their own or when strangers try to engage. And when there's trying to be comforted, they resist it. They're really like, well, what's a better way of putting it that isn't swearing? They're quite annoyed, to be fair. They're like, oh God, how dare you leave me and then try and give me comfort. So they're quite peed off, basically. So that's our 3 that she depicted from her strange situation studies. Quick quiz, you can engage in this, why not? Pause it, love a good quiz. So we've got Freddie watching a TV programme whilst playing. He becomes scared, climbs onto the mother's lap. He's comforted and calms down. When he's calmer, he continues to play. So what type of attachment is this? Obviously secure, using mum as the safe base, but still happy to explore. Sarah's at the park. Mother quickly pops into a shop while Sarah's playing. Oh, good one, mum. Sarah cannot see her mother and can only see strangers. Continues playing, seemingly unbothered by the absence of her mother. So couldn't care less. She's obviously going to be avoidant, quite independent. Maybe need to phone child services. Sam, dropped off by his mother at the house of a new babysitter. Mother leaves, he cries incessantly. Mum tries to calm him, he pushes her away, he's really annoyed, insecure resistant. So what I want you to do is use the textbooks to your advantage at this time. Every task that is in there, I'd like you to do. This is one of them. It's a bit of practicing that application, bringing this scenario, this STEM, quoting it into your answer with the knowledge. So I'll leave you some time to do that. Remember, any of these you can send me. Any essay plans, any essays you've written, send me. I'm going stir crazy. I need stuff to do. So please send me lots of work and pictures of animals. That'll be great. So do those, they're really useful. You can have a go at answering one of these questions. So this is an interesting one that examiners love if you could put it into your evaluation, is how have you applied it to real life? So where could we utilise research on attachment types? What area of the world, what area of society or psychology could we use this? And the most fundamental one is going to be things like relationships, relationship counselling. If you're an insecure avoidant with a secure person, how does that manifest problems? And that's the very last thing we look at in attachment, is how early intervention, how early interactions really last and play a massive part in your adult life. Okay, so you can have a look at some of those questions. Evaluation now. So I've done it a little bit differently. You can either follow my structure here and make your own notes, or use the book, up to you, and we can discuss it. But so you can do it this way. You can either follow what I've got on the PowerPoint step by step, or it's up to you. So support for validity on page 85, what can we summarise? If you want to do that, pause this now and then come back. Then our question would be something like I said, describe and evaluate the strange situation. So we need to have our 3 to 4 really good peeled paragraphs with a however in there to show a good, well-rounded argument of evaluation. You can use these to make your points and use these to make your links, what we've got used to doing before the world exploded. To support for validity then would look a little bit something like this. So using a research by Kokkinos, I think that's his name, what a great name. Our point, our evidence, explain, however statement and link. So if you want to structure that now, pause this and do that. You can then move on to looking at Bick and Takahashi and then boosting it if you want to look for those higher grades. And then I have a couple on here to talk through, just because we haven't really looked at reliability in a lot of depth as of yet. So something is reliable, it's consistent. And we can say that the strange situation, the procedure, is consistent within itself. So it has something called inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater just means that 2 or more observers have agreed that what they are seeing is the same. Okay, so if you've got one person viewing something, it's going to be completely different than if you have 3 or 4 people viewing it. And what they do is through those behaviour categories, things like, stranger leaves the room, how does the baby react? 2 people note down what they see. They then run a Spearman's row. If it comes out as 0.8 or above, we have good inter-rater reliability, which they found here. Okay, so because it's a controlled condition, so the procedure was basically a 2-way mirror glass, so that the child and the mum couldn't see the observers, but the observers could see them. And that's quite an interesting thing to think about for evaluation in terms of demand characteristics. The Hawthorne effect is at play here because it's an observation. Mum's not going to want to be viewed as a terrible parent, so maybe they change their behaviour in a way to make them look better. Okay, so that's something with internal validity that is a bit of a problem. But on the whole, we have good reliability. So the observers found agreement on attachment types of 94%. Okay, that's incredibly high. So they agreed, okay, this child is secure, this child is insecure avoidant. Okay, so that's good. However, we suffer with a bit of culture bias in the procedure. So insecure, avoidant, resistant, and secure isn't the same in different cultures. So it doesn't have the same meaning. Children respond differently to the strange situation depending on where they have been brought up and how they've been brought up. So next lesson, we'll look at these cultural variations. It's fascinating. And like I said earlier, Germany has a really high proportion of insecure avoidant because independence is a fundamental principle of an upbringing in Germany. Whereas, for example, China has a really high proportion of insecure resistant because they're always with their mother. The culture is they live with their parents, they look after their elders. So it completely varies. So things like it doesn't really work in Japan. There's high levels of separation anxiety. So the procedure is actually what we would call ethnocentric. So it is developed in the US, and they're trying to see it in lots of different countries, but it needs to, it's an imposed ethic. So now 2 key words there. So ethnocentric, it's developed in one culture and it's trying to be applied elsewhere, but it isn't. And it suffers from imposed ethic. So it's imposing the ideas of the US and attachment on a variety of different places around the world. It just doesn't work. Okay, so it's culture bound, but it's got good reliability. Internally valid, it sucks a little bit because it suffers from demand characteristics. So that's 3 that you can bring in as a problem there. And that's pretty much it for the strange situation. I love it. I find it really interesting, but it does have its flaws. Again, gender bias, we're just looking at mum and their children. What else can we pick out methodologically? All the problems of an observation you can talk about as well. So bring in the research method here and slate it. That could be part of your however. And what else? I suppose you could argue that attachment changes over time. So a lot of people don't spend that much time with their parents. We have, a bit sociological, we have a variety of different family types that are being developed. So it's going to look totally different. Okay, so lots of things to pick up on the strange situation there.